too far in his comments. The big question is, what does progress look like? And that part of that answer is going to come, I think, Kristen, in China. That is our next stop here. And obviously, the North Korean threat is going to be top of the agenda for President Trump and his team. We miss you, pal. I wish you were here. You could trade off the sleep shifts with us.
Oh, Hallie, I miss you guys, too. You guys are doing tremendous work out there. Don't go anywhere, though, because I want to drill down a little bit with you on that point you just raised, China, in a bit. Stand by for a second before we get to that, though, because joining me here on set is Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation. And, of course, Ken and Nancy continue to be here. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just pick up on that point that Hallie made, that shift in tone. And you say it's not just on North Korea. It's on the issue of trade as well. What do you make of this new tone? Is it a sign of progress?
Well, the president is certainly keeping us guessing. Before, there was a lot of speculation whether the U.S. was going to do a preventive attack, where we would attack North Korea simply to prevent them from completing development of an ICBM. That seems to be toned down. And also trade with South Korea. The president has been very critical of the KORUS, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, including when standing next to President Moon at the White House during the previous summit. Both of those subjects, we had much more toned-down subjects or dialogue from the president.
I want to get your thoughts on the meeting, the upcoming expected meeting with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. The president was asked about that. All eyes are going to be on that meeting as well. Take a listen. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
I want to just say that President Xi, where we will be tomorrow, China, has been very helpful. We'll find out how helpful soon, but he really has been very, very helpful. So China's out trying very hard to solve the problem with North Korea. We hope that Russia, likewise, will be helpful.
Nancy, we hope that Russia will be helpful, too. Do you expect the president to take a tough tone when he sits down with Vladimir Putin, if, in fact, that meeting does happen?
Well, I feel like what ends up happening is the president has this kind of chummy approach to diplomacy, and so he doesn't necessarily hew to the typical briefing standards or standards of diplomacy. He just thinks that if he's going to sidle up to a leader and sort of woo them over with his charm, that will work. I think what ends up happening, particularly with Russia and both China, is that he ends up sort of sometimes using phrases that he doesn't understand the implications of, which signal things to Russia or Chinese officials that don't necessarily fulfill what the U.S. wants in terms of foreign policy.
All right, let me go back to my colleague, Hallie Jackson. Hallie, before I let you go, you talked about China. We're talking about China here. How tough do you expect President Trump to be when he goes to China? China's the linchpin in all of this. The White House thinks that China is the one country, President Xi Jinping, that actually has the power to pressure North Korea to stop its nuclear provocations.
That is going to be the U.S.'s biggest sort of card to play if it ends up being able to play that card with North Korea. And that is why that visit is so important, Kristen, not just because of the North Korea discussion, but because of the trade talk as well. Remember, you've got the CEO delegation heading to China, too. So a lot of business folks are watching to see how that develops. I think that on North Korea, you are going to see the president exert as much pressure as he can on Xi Jinping. But remember, these are two leaders that, unlike President Moon here in South Korea, where the president is just sort of starting to develop that relationship, he and Xi are frankly pretty tight. Remember the Mar-a-Lago summit? You were there with me there in Florida back last year, or end of the year, when the two of them were sort of together. They were building this relationship. It raised some eyebrows then, just given sort of Xi's status in China, given how early it was that the president was meeting with him. But I do think that you're going to see what's being called this state visit plus. So tons of pomp and circumstance, tons of pageantry. The president likes that. You know this. The president enjoys that very lavish, warm welcome. You saw that to a degree here at the Blue House in Seoul. I think you're going to see it to an exponential degree once the president gets to Beijing. There are some folks watching to see, though, how conciliatory and how laudatory President Trump will be towards President Xi, who, as you know, just consolidated a lot of power recently in the last few weeks. President Trump going so far as to call him like a king in China. That's the kind of talk that I think analysts are looking at and going, hey, I hope he doesn't go quite that far. He doesn't need to be so sort of deferential to Xi while he's there. But to President Trump, it is an important opportunity to relationship build. Kristen.
All right, Hallie, I know you will be watching and reporting on every single minute of it. Keep up all of your tremendous work. We miss you here back at home. Thank you for that, pal. And Bruce, let me give you the final word. You heard Hallie's preview. What are you anticipating? What else do you think we might see there in China?
Well, there are two lanes in the road with China. We can implore, cajole, pressure them into doing more on North Korea. They've often promised a lot and underperformed. But there's also things we can be doing with U.S. law that we continue to pull our punches on. Secondary sanctions against Chinese violators of U.S. law, money laundering and other crimes. We're still not doing that.
Why aren't we doing that, do you think?
It's a good question. Several administrations have not really gone after Chinese violators, those that are misusing the U.S. financial system. We don't need Chinese permission to go after them. We can do it ourselves. It had seen there was a momentum to imposing secondary sanctions on Chinese banks and some businesses. And then when we had the new executive order a month or so ago, it seemed the momentum stopped, whether we're just putting kind of a new peg point in the ground and saying, we'll forget about the past transgressions. From now on, we'll be looking for more compliance.
Right.
We don't know.
All right, well, we will continue to track all of this very closely. Bruce, thanks for being here, to helping us understand all of it. Nancy and Ken, stick around. And voters are heading to the polls today for some key gubernatorial races in Virginia and New York.